Valentino Spring 2026 Runway highlights soft glam summer trends. Introduction. Welcome to Alara Fashion Style, where I love exploring the most beautiful and inspiring runway moments with you. Today, I'm diving into Valentino Spring 2026, a collection that feels like a soft whisper of glamour rather than a loud declaration. I think this season invites us to rethink what elegance really means in a modern summer wardrobe. What I find interesting is how Valentino manages to feel both delicate and powerful at the same time. Have you ever noticed how the quietest styles often leave the strongest impression? A new vision of soft glam. I think Valentino's interpretation of soft glam this season is less about sparkle and more about emotion. In my experience, true glamour doesn't need to shout, and this collection proves that beautifully. What I find interesting is how the designs lean into fluidity rather than structure, creating a sense of effortless grace. Unlike most bold runway trends, this approach feels wearable and intimate. It makes me wonder, are we finally moving away from overstatement toward subtle luxury? First impressions from the runway. When I first saw the runway, I felt an immediate sense of calm sophistication. I think the pacing, the music, and the silhouettes all work together to create a cohesive story. What I find interesting is how nothing felt rushed or overly dramatic, yet everything held attention. In my experience, that kind of restraint is actually harder to achieve than extravagance. Did the collection feel calming to you too? Or do you prefer more dramatic fashion moments? The power of sheer fabrics. I think sheer fabrics played a central role in defining this collection's identity. In my experience, sheer elements can either feel cheap or incredibly luxurious depending on execution, and Valentino clearly chose the latter. What I find interesting is how layering was used to create depth without heaviness. Unlike more revealing trends, this felt elegant rather than provocative. Isn't it fascinating how transparency can actually make a look feel more refined? Soft color palettes that speak volumes. I think the muted tones, powder pinks, creams, and soft nudes are what truly elevate this collection. In my experience, softer colors require more confidence because they don't rely on boldness to stand out. What I find interesting is how Valentino made these shades feel rich instead of washed out. Unlike vibrant palettes, these tones invite a closer look. Do you find yourself drawn to softer colors? Or do you usually prefer bold statements? Romantic silhouettes reimagined. I think Valentino redefined romance by simplifying traditional feminine shapes. In my experience, overly romantic designs can feel dated, but here they felt modern and fresh. What I find interesting is how volume was balanced with lightness, never overwhelming the wearer. Unlike classic romantic fashion, this felt wearable for everyday elegance. Could this be the new way to embrace femininity without excess? Minimalism meets emotion. What I find interesting is how this collection blends minimalism with emotional storytelling. I think minimal fashion often risks feeling cold, but Valentino infused it with warmth. In my experience, that balance is rare and incredibly impactful. Unlike stark minimalism, these looks feel personal and expressive. Do you think minimal fashion can still feel emotional, or does it usually come across as distant? The role of texture. I think texture quietly carried much of the visual interest in this collection. In my experience, when color is subdued, texture becomes essential. What I find interesting is how fabrics like chiffon and silk created movement with every step. Unlike heavily embellished garments, these relied on subtle tactile beauty. Isn't it amazing how texture can replace decoration entirely? Day-to-night versatility. I think one of the strongest aspects of this collection is its versatility. In my experience, the best pieces are the ones that transition effortlessly from day to evening. What I find interesting is how Valentino achieved this without adding complexity. Unlike many runway looks, these feel adaptable to real life. Can you imagine wearing these pieces from brunch straight to a summer evening event? Accessories that whisper luxury. I think the accessories were intentionally understated, yet incredibly impactful. In my experience, subtle accessories often elevate a look more than bold ones. What I find interesting is how Valentino avoided overpowering the outfits. Unlike statement-heavy styling, this approach feels refined and timeless. Do you prefer accessories that stand out, or ones that quietly enhance your outfit? The influence of heritage. I think Valentino's heritage is deeply embedded in this collection. In my experience, brands with strong histories often struggle to evolve, but this felt seamless. What I find interesting is how classic elements were reinterpreted rather than repeated. Unlike nostalgic collections, this one feels forward-thinking. How important is brand heritage to you when it comes to fashion? unexpected details that surprise. What I find interesting is how small, unexpected details added personality to each look. I think these subtle surprises kept the collection from feeling too safe. In my experience, it's often the smallest design choices that leave the biggest impression. Unlike loud statement pieces, these details reward closer attention. Did you notice how those little touches change the entire mood of an outfit? Comfort as a form of luxury. I think comfort is becoming the new definition of luxury, and Valentino embraces that idea beautifully. In my experience, when I feel comfortable, I automatically feel more confident. What I find interesting is how the silhouettes allow movement without sacrificing elegance. Unlike restrictive fashion, this feels liberating. Could comfort actually be the most powerful style statement today? Comparing Valentino to other runways. Unlike most fashion houses this season that leaned into bold, dramatic statements, Valentino chose restraint. I think that contrast makes this collection stand out even more. In my experience, subtlety often gets overlooked, but here it becomes the main attraction. What I find interesting is how this quiet approach feels more memorable. Do you think understated fashion has more lasting power than bold trends? A surprisingly modern take on femininity. I think the most surprising element is how modern the femininity feels. In my experience, soft glam can sometimes feel it taculi, but this felt progressive. What I find interesting is how strength and softness coexist in every look. Unlike traditional ideas of femininity, this feels empowering rather than delicate. Isn't it refreshing to see softness redefined as strength? styling these looks in real life. I think adapting these runway looks into everyday outfits is easier than it seems. In my experience, focusing on one key element like fabric or color makes all the difference. What I find interesting is how these designs translate into wearable elegance. Unlike overly complex trends, these are approachable. Would you try incorporating soft glam into your daily style? Who this collection speaks to? I think this collection speaks to women who value quiet confidence. In my experience, not everyone wants to be the loudest in the room, and that's perfectly fine. What I find interesting is how inclusive this aesthetic feels across different ages and lifestyles. Unlike trend-driven fashion, this feels timeless. Do you see yourself reflected in this kind of style? Emotional connection to fashion. What I find interesting is how this collection creates an emotional response rather than just visual appeal. I think fashion is at its best when it makes you feel something. In my experience, pieces like these become wardrobe favorites because of that connection. Unlike purely trendy items, they hold meaning. Have you ever worn something that completely changed how you felt? My personal take on Valentino SS 2026. I think this is one of Valentino's most refined collections in recent years. In my experience, it's rare to see such a clear and cohesive vision, executed so beautifully. What I find interesting is how it balances modernity with timeless elegance. Unlike trend-heavy collections, this feels enduring. Would I wear these pieces? Absolutely. Especially for moments when I want to feel effortlessly elegant. Conclusion. As I reflect on Valentino Spring 2026, I think it represents a shift toward quieter, more intentional fashion. In my experience, these are the kinds of collections that influence style long after the season ends. What I find interesting is how soft glam might redefine what we consider luxurious in the future. So tell me, do you prefer this subtle elegance or bold, statement-making fashion? If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to Alara Fashion Style for more inspiring fashion insights.